Okay.
Hello and welcome to CoSAFF. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion with the creators and writers of some path-breaking South Asian series that are on streaming platforms. My name is Pulkit Datta, and I am the artistic director of the Tasveer South Asian Film Festival, which is one of the 7 festivals that have come together to create CoSAFF. The festivals in CoSAFF include Tasveer, the Chicago South Asian Film Festival, the DC South Asian Film Festival, Mosaic International South Asian Film Festival, Nepal America International Film Festival, South Asian Film Festival of Montreal, the Vancouver International South Asian Film Festival. We will also be taking audience questions during this panel. Please go to slido.com and use the event code 49498. The link is also in the description of the video below, so please send us your questions for the panelists, and we'd love to ask them while we're having our discussion. And now I'd love to introduce our 4 panelists, and I'll introduce them with a little bit about their work and also the shows that they're here to talk about. So we're going to start with Smriti Mundhra. Smriti is an Academy Award nominated director, producer, and one of Doc NYC's 40 under 40 filmmakers to watch. Her latest film, St. Louis Superman, has been nominated for a 2020 Academy Award in the short documentary category. Her debut feature, the documentary A Suitable Girl, world premiered in competition at the 2017 Tribeca Film Festival to rave reviews from Variety, Hollywood Reporter, New York Magazine, and was awarded the Albert Maysles Best Documentary Director Prize at the festival. Smriti is a creator of Indian Matchmaking, which is on Netflix. It's the story of matchmaker Seema Taparia, who guides her clients in the US and India in the arranged marriage process and offers an inside look at this custom in the modern era. Welcome, Smriti.
Hi, Pulkit. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. All right, next up we have Aseem Abbasi. Aseem is an independent filmmaker based out of Pakistan and the UK. His debut feature film as writer-director Cake opened theatrically in 2018 to critical acclaim. It was the first Urdu Pakistani film to have its world premiere at West End in Leicester Square and won him the Best Director Award at the UK Asian Film Festival. Cake also won the awards for Best Film at the Tasveer South Asian Film Festival and the South Asian Film Festival of Montreal, which are both part of CoSAFF. He's the creator of the show Churails on Z5. This is a story of Sarah, Jugnu, Batul, and Zubeda, who are 4 women who come together to form a secret detective agency with the purpose to find and expose unfaithful husbands, operating under the guise of a fashion store named Halal Designs. Welcome, Aseem.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We have a lot to talk about. All right, next up we have Richie Mehta. Richie's first film, Amal, starred Nasiruddin Shah, Roshan Sheth, and Seema Biswas. The film won over 30 international awards and was named one of the top 10 Canadian films of the decade by Playback magazine. He's also written and directed I'll Follow You Down and Siddharth. Siddharth received over 25 international awards and was shortlisted for the Best Foreign Language Film at the 2015 Golden Globe Awards. Richie is the creator of the show Delhi Crime, which is on Netflix. In 2012, a heinous crime enraged the whole country. This show is based on the case files of the Delhi police, and the story follows the unfailing determination of Vartika Chaturvedi, who is the investigating officer, to find the perpetrators of the crime. But this time, her hunt is personal. Welcome, Richie.
Yes. Sorry, I had to unmute and on video. Hi.
There he is. Hi. All right. And last but certainly not the least, we have Devika Bhagat. Devika started her career as an assistant director and then turned to screenwriting in 2005. Since then, 6 of her screenplays have been made into major feature films. She's written a TV series, Mahiwe, which was for Yash Raj Television and was broadcast on Sony TV in 2010 and is now available on Netflix. Her first film as director, One by Two, released in January 2014. Devika is the writer of the show 4 More Shots, Please, which is on Amazon Prime. The show follows the story of four unapologetically flawed women as they live, love, make mistakes, and discover what really makes them tick through friendship and shots of tequila. Welcome, Devika.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So we have four very different shows here, but also with a lot of commonalities. And in this discussion, I really want to, first of all, go into sort of the origin stories of each of your shows. And then also I want to dig into a little bit more of what the commonalities are, what the common threads are, because I was noticing some as I was sort of preparing for this. And then also, because some of our audience members are also filmmakers and writers, we'd love to talk a little bit about behind the scenes of how it actually is to create a series and what the process is like. And then also, you've all made series that have crossed boundaries and have taken South Asian stories global, and appealing to sort of a wide range of demographics. So that's also something that's really fascinating to talk about, that we're taking South Asian stories on a global platform and what that means for representation and for all different communities of South Asians around the world in seeing their stories represented. So I want to start with the beginnings of all this. Series, I'm a filmmaker too, so I kind of understand, developing a story, you come up with a lot of ideas, you come up with a lot of threads. How does a germ of a story turn into a series? What warrants it turning into a series? So I'd love to hear your sort of origin stories of your shows. Maybe let's start with Richie, if you want to talk about Delhi Crime.
Sure, thank you. First of all, I want to do a shout out to Mosaic because that's my hometown, Mississauga. So happy Mosaic people. So the origin of Delhi Crime is very complicated because I started writing it. Before I even started writing it, I was introduced to the possibility of doing it as a film a few months after about 6 months after the crime happened in 2013. And it was a family friend who was part of the Delhi police, who was the commissioner, recently retired, and he had put me on to this and suggested that I make a film out of it. And I thought that nobody should make a film out of this subject. But then he introduced me to some of the cops who were involved, especially the woman who led this team. And I got to know them over the course of the next few years and started to feel there's something really special here. And something that we can benefit from if we dramatize it, because to me the biggest question all the way through was, should this be made? So the more I researched it and the worse things got, the more I questioned. I'm not sure this should be in any way used for drama, because it would be a type of exploitation and it would have the completely reverse impact that I want. But then when I got to know the women who are dealing with this on the front lines, women who are fighting against this national epidemic of gang rape, we needed to know more. The public needed to know more about what they deal with, the problems they have, and even as I talked to the cops, I started to understand more of the psychology of their profession, because they certainly, for the most part, didn't have people to talk to. They don't see police psychologists. That's just not something that's there. I wasn't there at the time, at least. So I started writing it out. I'm skipping a lot, but I started writing it out as a feature film based on the research I was doing, meeting all these cops, putting together a timeline of the events, understanding who the characters were. And then it just became really big. And then I had a meeting with somebody at HBO in 2013. And it was just a casual general meeting. And in that meeting, he asked what I was up to. And I said, I'm working on this, this, and this. I'm working on this film about this crime. And he goes, would you do that as a series? I said, I don't know, would you do it as a series? And he goes, well, I would be interested in looking at it, certainly. And I said, I don't know how to write series. I'm sorry. I'd done 4 films at the time, a documentary. And he goes, oh, I can help you with that. And I said, really? So I started writing it as a he just said, just start writing the whole thing out. And it was a big film. At that point it was 3 hours. And then I continued writing it and it became an 8-hour film in terms of the outline. And then I started sending him stuff and he would just come back and said, you've written an 8-hour film and it's really boring. Here's the difference now between a film and a series. And he started giving me some pointers. These little tidbits that completely changed the way I looked at drama and long form drama in the format that we understand. Again, this was a few years ago. So Netflix had just started House of Cards. HBO at that time was the only real player in globally in high-end long form. And there was a few others now trickling in. So to me, it was such a long shot and didn't even make sense, but I started working on it. And then the tidbits he gave me, which I'm happy to share, but they were so magical, changed my outlook. And then I started writing the outline for the whole thing. And then it became eight episodes. I'm just talking about the creative evolution, not the business. We can save that if you want later. Because again, this whole thing was put together, was researched, written, financed, and shot completely independently of any platform or. And then
and that's definitely something I want to get to.
We'll get to that later
on, because that's also part of the process of how does it get onto the platform.
Exactly.
But yeah, this is a really interesting to know that you were first developing it as a film and then trying to figure out what medium does this story sort of fit best into, and what's the greatest impact it can have through that medium. So thank you for sharing that. Smriti, you want to talk about Indian matchmaking? I mean, you're coming, this was sort of based on your documentary, or taking off from your documentary. And then, also like, how do you define Indian matchmaking? Is it doc series or is it reality? Does it blend those lines? I'd love to know how it started.
Before I start talking, I want to hear Richie's tidbits. I'm sure everybody does. Richie, please share.
I'll tell you the one that changed my life. It was, if you look at narrative films, like in terms of the story, like a tree trunk, and most narrative films that we digest globally are plot based. So, and that's your trunk. And the difference between a film and a series is, with a series, you imagine the branches are character diversions from the plot. And they don't actually necessarily have to deal with the plot. They can just be for the sake of those characters. So you can deviate, and then as long as you come back. And the value of the series are the leaves that come from, what the characters actually bring out is the whole point of the series. And so in terms of order of importance in a film, it's plot, character, world. And in a series, it's the reverse. It's world, character, plot. When you told me that, it just changed my whole view.
That's really amazing.
That's fantastic advice. I don't think I've heard it articulated that before. Well, so Indian matchmaking was born out of personal experiences. I worked with Aseem Mehta as my matchmaker when I was much younger and single, and this was prior even to making A Suitable Girl. And I just, she's a very known matchmaker in my community, and knew a lot of my relatives and things like that. And I just found her to be an absolutely fascinating person. I mean, I was completely disinterested in the marriage process at that time, but I kept engaging with her because I found her to be so interesting as a person. And I was like, we will make something together at some point. I'm going to make something about this woman. And initially I'd written a feature film about her. And when I out of grad school, 2009, I tried to get that film financed and couldn't. It was, economic recession, and also, it was just very difficult to get a film about, an Indian matchmaker written and directed by an Indian American woman financed at that time. Then I tried to pitch it as a docuseries, a reality series. At that time, that we didn't really have, docuseries in that sense. Got no traction. Was told it was too niche. I pitched it to a couple of like the biggest reality TV producers in the US, and was told it was too niche. And then, so, I just put it aside, ended up making A Suitable Girl, which was more focused on Seema's daughter, Ritu, who is going through the process of trying to find, the sort of coming of age process of getting married under the thumb of this like extremely domineering personality of having a matchmaker as a mother. And she was, like me, like very, relatively disinterested in that process and was feeling very conflicted about it. So A Suitable Girl, was very much a way for me to sort through my feelings around, not even so much marriage, but just the way that, for Indian women, our self-worth is so much tied to whether or not we're married. But we left a lot on the table, in making that documentary. That film was really from the perspective of young women. But, there was this whole world of matchmaking, and Seema's world with her clients and her business and all of that we didn't really even explore or tap into. And so after A Suitable Girl came out and it was doing really well on the festival circuit, I got an email from Bela Bajaria at Netflix. She just recently joined Netflix as the head of the unscripted division. And that was sort of, right at the beginning of when Netflix was starting to aggressively pursue global content. And they were among the first to really be serious about that. And so when I met Bela, it was a general meeting and, similar to what Richie was describing, for his meeting at HBO. And it was, she was like, what, do you have any ideas for an unscripted series in India? Like something that would be fun and, appealing. And I was like, I have exactly the idea for you. I know this matchmaker and she's got these insane clients and her world is crazy, but it's also really fun and it, really taps into something deeply personal for a lot of people. And I was like, this should be a show. And it was, it was the first and last show that I sold that easily. I've never had such an easy time selling a series since then. It was like purely beginner's luck, but I
even
left
after.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was, I left that meeting with having sold a show to Netflix, which has never happened to me since then. It's like a much more arduous process, as I'm sure everybody on this panel can speak to. But even after, we sold the show to Netflix or, sold the idea to Netflix, it was, the development process was complicated. It was, to answer your question about whether it's a docuseries or a reality show, it's somewhere in between. I wouldn't say it's not a traditional documentary by any means. It was like had a certain sort of level of production and certain limitations of shooting because of the scale of the production, which was very different than the way that I made A Suitable Girl, which was filmed over 4 years. With like all the equipment could fit in a backpack. But it was not a reality show because we weren't trying to pull like cast for characters and cast for this is going to be the villain and this is going to be the hero and this person is going to stir up some SHIT in episode 3. It was really, the casting process was very much like a documentary in the sense that we just wanted people who were going to be open and honest and vulnerable about their process and genuinely wanted to get married. And then for the most part, even the production was that way. There was no heavy hand of production saying like, this is where this story is going to go or that story. It was just more about coordinating with people to make sure we were there to capture the significant elements, of each person's journey. And it was really hard to explain that, to people that, because I think people saw A Suitable Girl and, that engendered a certain amount of respect in the sense that, that film had done well and it was, made, kind of appreciated for the level of care for the subject matter and the nuance for the subject matter. But I think you're going to be like in my face with a camera for 4 years, no way, no thank you. But it also wasn't a reality show. So I think it was just it was difficult to articulate to people, especially people in India where the sort of commercial documentary space, hadn't really taken off yet. So it was really difficult for people to explain, well, it's not a traditional documentary and it's not, Splitsvilla or like a reality show, like that, Bachelor or whatever, what have you. So that really narrowed our pool, of participants. But ultimately, we found, I think, the perfect, cast of people, the great sort of array of personalities, and also tried to, within this like very specific world, try to find as many diverse points of view around the idea of marriage and tradition and family and all of that as we possibly could. Yeah, it was like, there was so many points in production and development and in pre-production and production and post-production where we were like, what the hell are we doing? How is this going to work? How are we going to hold this together? It was just like one thing would come together, 10 things would fall apart at every moment. So to now be on the other end of that and see the series be so watched and discussed and, you know, for the most part appreciated is quite amazing.
I'm glad you clarified that process, because I remember when the series came out, there was also comments on like, oh, this is manufactured, or it's you're telling people what to do and controlling all that, which people are used to the reality TV side of it, knowing that a lot of that is manufactured. So I'm glad you sort of
and in
talked
India,
to us,
people
yeah.
were always like, oh, the actors are so natural and the dialogue is so natural. How did you write? I'm like, no, it's not dialogue and they're not actors.
Smriti, you should run with it.
Yeah, I know.
Come in.
You discovered the best
we could have done it
actors.
in a third of the time. If we would have contrived anything, it would have been much faster production
Right.
process. That's for sure.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And then let's move on to Aseem. Let's talk about Churails. How did this come about?
Well, it came about in 2018. So I had just kind of finished the promotional tour of Cake, and I was kind of figuring out what to do. And really after, you know, I had thought that I'd done one film, some doors will open now and there'll be another film or something, but it just, you start back at square one. And it was just like, I was like, okay, now what? And everyone would call me for meetings. And in Pakistan, everything is focused on very commercialized cinema. So Cake was offbeat, made with private investors, made with my own savings. I would go into these meetings and they'd be like, they'll all treat me like Cake was like this little pet thing that I had done. And now I had to like become a man and do a feature film, like feature film should be done with songs and dances. And I was like, no, that's not my thing. I can't. There are people who can do the, you know, wet sari stuff much better than I can. And I don't want to do that kind of cinema. So I think I was really stuck into what, and Churails was something that I was also thinking about as a film. There's all these things that I'd kind of grown up with, like, you know, the subjugation of women in the subcontinent was something that I just really, really wanted to talk about. But when I started writing it, I was like, firstly, it's never going to get approved by the censors. There's just no chance. And the second thing was that it was just too long. There was too much that I wanted to say. So, and just as luck would have it, like Shailja from Z kind of reached out. She had seen Cake and she said, hey, are you interested in doing series? And I was like, oh, I've never done one, but like, sure, I'll be open to thinking about it. So I pitched a couple of ideas and Churails was the one that kind of stuck with them. And they said, okay, can you just do a pilot for us and a series Bible and see if it kind of works? So I did that. And for me, surprisingly, I felt like I had found my home, because I think I write ensembles. I just find it easier than writing single protagonist stuff for some reason. And with Cake also, it was an ensemble film, and the first cut was like 3.5 hours, and we had to cut it down to 2. So I think just long form just really for me works, because I find it more exciting to write and flesh out the characters and do all of the stuff that you can with a series that you can't do in a 2-hour film. So that's how that got kind of, you know, I got roped in to do that. And I didn't have a writer's room, so I had to write all 10 myself. And not enough months to do it because they wanted to go into production. So it was like 16 hours a day flat. I was writing every day. So that was the genesis of it, really. And frankly, you know, we still don't have Netflix and Amazon presence in Pakistan. It's a very small industry. It's very nascent. It's not developed enough. And I think because of the language similarity with India, I think that the general consensus is it's a slightly safer place. We know what we're getting in India. It's the same kind of content that will also appeal to Pakistan. Why should we go to Pakistan? And I think Z kind of, you know, tapped into this, that there's a lot of like Indian demand for Pakistani content because of that similarity, and for Pakistani artists and stuff like that. So they kind of wanted to get more and more. I think this was one of the 5 that they had commissioned. So Churails was the first one that came out.
It's part of the Zindagi, right? The channel.
Yes. So Zindagi used to be a television broadcast channel in India, which used to acquire assets. So now, and then it got shut down because of political reasons, and now it's kind of come back as a digital only thing, and with new content, original content as well.
So is Churails the first major sort of OTT series to come out of Pakistan?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. We've
Great.
had a very small, we have had small ones. So like 15, 20-minute stuff, but like not full blown series like our episodes. No, this is the first one. Yes.
And what a journey you've been on with it. Great. So let's move on to Devika. So I know you have a slightly different relationship to your show because you're the writer of it, because it's created by someone else. So I'd love to know where, 4 More Shots, please, how you got involved, how it was created.
Rongita Nandi, the creator of the show, had actually developed it as a film back in 2015-16, and nobody had commissioned it because they didn't want to tell a film about 4 women doing their own thing. So she had, basically put it in her little script vault. And when Amazon Prime came about in about 2016 and then started to really commission shows out of India, is when, she thought maybe this is an idea that would appeal to somebody like Amazon Prime. So she basically took the story idea that she had developed for a film and she made a little PPT and she took it and they said, yes, they said, we would like to now see you with a series Bible. So that's when I came on board, where the characters, the one-liner of the show was kind of developed. It was then to take this material and to really flesh out the characters, to make the series Bible and to bring something different about it. So I think one of the first discussions was that if we are telling a story about 4 women in urban India, why should it appeal to the rest of India? I mean, we're talking about 5% of 1.3 billion people. Why should somebody in Jaipur or Lucknow care about some girl being a lawyer or a journalist in South Mumbai going to a bar to drink and wearing fancy clothes? And it was like Rongita was very particular about the aspirational aspect of this show. So she wanted to showcase South Bombay because she's from there. And she wanted to, really showcase these women in that light. So then what I wanted to bring to the table was to really represent these women as flesh and blood and not to really put them in a perfect image or a mold that, if you don't fit those, then there's some choice words used for you on social media. So it was to make them really flesh and blood in the sense of being in charge of their own decisions and giving them choice and giving them agency. And basically, the decisions that they make, it could be right, it could be wrong. The choices that they make could be right, could be wrong. And we're not really trying to put them in a mold. And the idea was to speak to the issues that exist in India for women. So that, whether it's to do with professional life, struggling with coping with motherhood and professional life, or whether it's patriarchy or whether it's sexual harassment at work, or whether it's falling prey to arranged marriage and ascertaining your value through the man that you're going to marry, etc. So those are universal issues that women face in India. So the idea was to bring that into it. So that's where I came in. And basically, because we had so much to say, it was me, it was the creator Rongita, it was her sister, the showrunner Ishita, because we hadn't been allowed to say so much that we wanted to say about women. For me, 15 years, 14 years, and we just spewed it all out. We want to say this, we want to say that. So a lot of times, we did get feedback that you have so much going on in the show. It's like because we had so much to say that we weren't allowed to say. So that's basically how the show evolved.
Thank you. Great panelists, they keep me on point. Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point about, the series format allowing you a lot more time and space to say more of what you want to say. And I think each one of you touched on that. I want to go back to what Richie was talking about with, a show that's obviously based on a real incident. And then this sort of applies to each of you in a different way. But how do you establish tone? Its tone is such a crucial thing. I mean, obviously for a film, it's a crucial thing, but for a series, even more crucial because once you have so much more space to tell a story, it can veer off easily in many different directions. And I mean, I love Richie's sort of tidbits of how to, that tree analogy there. But, Richie, I'll start with you. You have a show that is based on a real event, which is obviously a terrible, terrible, tragedy. Dealing with a very serious issue. The show is also crafted with sort of a thriller-esque tone to it. How did you balance that? And this actually ties into another question, one of the audience questions that came in from Kate Key. Sort of what is the responsibility riding on your shoulders when you're making a fiction series on a real life incident, especially something as serious as this? So if you can sort of tackle that.
Sure. I think, I mean, for me, certainly, I had to look at other examples of film and or shows that had similarly either heinous or shocking or just kind of negatively slanted stories that I respected a great deal, and I had and especially ones that I had no connection to as a human being. So Zodiac was a big one for me, the David Fincher film, and so was The French Connection. Those are two projects I used as examples of films that would take a real life subject. In those cases, they have to be police centered. Zodiac was, in terms of a narrative, was more important that way because it obviously there were families affected. You know, lots of people died through that, and the film. The first decision I made was never to show the crime. I didn't have to because everyone already knew the details of it, and I thought it would immediately take this into a category which it shouldn't be because it's not about the crime. It's about the women trying to fight it. And secondly, the big tonal choice I made in the writing stage, because there's writing tone and then there's directing tone. If those are two different things, that you have a problem with the project. With me, I could just bake it into the DNA. Was to siphon out as much melodrama as I could so that it didn't exist. So for example, to the question that was asked as well, I didn't, everything that had to do with the case, I stuck to as closely as I could, as closely as humanly possible to do with the case itself, as far as I understood it. There were times I used, if people remember Jurassic Park, I used for the frog DNA thing, where you have to fill in bits of DNA sequencing to finish your dinosaur. And in that way, I had to just extrapolate things where I couldn't get any verification, but I had 90% of the picture. I would just extrapolate what is plausible. And then the personal stories, I had met enough cops to know the personal stories, and then I could amalgamate. But there was nothing that I fabricated out of thin air. So from a writing standpoint, it's sticking to reality as much as I can. And the thriller aspect of it, those are the tricks of the trade. I mean, I said to myself, no one's going to want to engage with a story about gang rape. It's one thing because it touches such a sensitive nerve in South Asia. Globally, people have just heard of it and would say, oh, that's India, not our problem. It's awful, but big deal. So for me, I just started, again, looking at those films, I started using the tricks of the genre trade. How can I make this interesting without crossing into a line of dramatic exploitation and melodrama? Just so we could understand that this is worth engaging in, because I don't think people want to engage with the subject.
And I'm glad you mentioned sort of the writing tone and the directing tone, because when you were shooting it, did you have any moments where you were questioning that? Like, were you questioning, is this veering into melodrama at all, or is this going into a direction I don't want to take it in?
Certainly the melodrama, I try to have a very sensitive radar for that. So anything that veered into it, I would just pull it back. And the actors we chose were so good. So they knew what to do. And that's a credit to the casting director as well as the performers. However, it's really interesting, right? Because this is where and Smriti, I know, can speak a lot to this, because the edit created a lot of the tone in that show. Pacing was determined by the edit, and we obviously there was a lot of long takes. We kind of knew what we were doing in that way. Everyone knew they were going for realism. We were shooting in a real police station that was completely active for the entire show, and integrated a lot of cops in the background. There was even prisoners walking around. Like it was completely integrated, so the actors knew how to match. But the edit also, there was a lot of choices you can make. We could veer things slightly into buffoonery if we wanted, slightly into melodrama, slightly into the filmy stuff. And we just tried as much as possible to keep it in a mildly dark space. We didn't have to go too dark because the darkness was the undercurrent of the whole show. And we tried to keep the thrust moving. It's amazing when you do things. I'm not going to say I did it right because we had a great team, the editor and the composer. When you do things right, it's amazing what the viewer brings in to bridge those gaps tonally. You just set the stage for that, and then they can kind of complete it.
Yeah, I think trusting your audience to also fill in those gaps is really important, right? Because I think a lot of content we've also been used to, especially in the South Asian context, has involved certain level of spoon feeding as well. So I think the great thing about OTT series is also you can trust your audience to sort of figure things out that you're kind of hinting at sometimes.
Absolutely right. And to remove the hand of the filmmaker in the layperson's viewing is very important for me in that manner. So if somebody's not interested in filmmaking per se, they're watching it, I don't think they're going to think about the filmmaker or the team as they're watching it. They're going to immerse themselves in it.
Into the story.
That's crucial for not filling in the visual and acoustic airwaves. If you bombard them with visual and acoustic imagery and sounds, there's no room for them, I feel.
Yeah, and then I want to move on to Aseem with the similar question about tone. Your show is also dealing with a lot of very heavy subject matter, but the way you've treated the structure of your show, it also jumps in time. Yeah. And the tone is also really interesting because it's trying to strike this balance between serious, heavy stuff that happens to a lot of women with, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, is it sort of?
I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it's. I don't want to call it fun because fun's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Like, you've got that sort of this interesting balance there. So you want to talk about how you establish that tone?
Sure. I mean, I have to again. I'm just one series old, and I don't know how it works for everyone else. But for me, I was given complete creative freedom with this, and I had always thought that they'd hold me back, and they'll say he's going too far, he's trying to do too much. But every time I would send the scripts, and they'd like it, and they'll approve it. So I decided to have a lot of crazy fun with it. Crazy fun in the sense that I decided to just play around with things that I wouldn't normally play around with. So the tone, you're right, is not one tone. It shifts. It drastically shifts. So the first 2 episodes, if you watch it, it is very fun. It does have a very fun vibe. All of these women getting together, finding cheating husbands. And so sort of it starts to get into more serious zone from episode 3, 4, and gets super dark in the second. So it goes from like almost a slight chick flick vibe to this darker thriller, to a more of a psychological drama in episode 10. So it vastly shifts gears, and that was part of the critique as well. But I was like, I kind of knew what I was doing with that, so I was okay with that critique. But so that tonal shift was kind of important for me, just to set the space, and also to I like the idea of like messing with the audience's mind. I like the idea that they went in, they saw the first 2 episodes and felt like they were going to watch something that was pretty light, and then the one incident kind of completely changes that in episode 3 or 4. So I think that is how I was approaching tone. I was just letting it be very free flowing.
It must be nice to have that level of freedom.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was good. It was good to just experiment with because I'm not, you tend to tell yourself that this is a thriller, and then everything should kind of fit in that peg, or it's a drama. And I let myself not be too aware of it or too bogged down by it. And I think it was pretty liberating that way.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that takes me to Devika. I want to talk about 4 More Shots. And this ties also to a question we're getting from Jigar. So, this show can be seen as sort of India's version of Sex and the City in some ways, but obviously it's localized and contextualized. So, I want you to talk about also the tone, but tying to that, in a culture that sort of likes to sweep a lot of things under the rug, your show is sort of putting it out there, laying bare a lot of things that we don't often hear women talk about in sort of, say, mainstream entertainment. So for you, I guess it's classified as a comedy show, as a comedy series, and I think it was recently nominated as a comedy series as well.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's dealing with misogyny and sexism and harassment. There's a lot of serious things happening there too. So how did you establish that? And what did you hope would come out of establishing that tone for this kind of show?
Yeah. So I mean, it's classified as a comedy, especially because the nomination for the International Emmy is because Emmy classifies half our shows in the comedy section, and you have to appeal if you wanted to be in the drama. But I would classify as a drama comedy. The idea was not to really bring in situational humor. It was more to bring in organic humor with the lines and with the characters and with the relationships, and therefore each scene or the story arc was to basically allow it to have humor when it needed to, and allow it to have the drama when it needed to, depending upon the situation. And a lot of times there was a kind of a natural instinct to want to get didactic, especially when we were talking about feminism or women's issues. And a couple of times we did allow it to get in, which in a show like this, becomes too heavy-handed, and it does, really shine out, or rather, it juts out in not a nice manner. So the idea was to make it organic and not to really classify it as a comedy or drama, but to rather let the characters really flow in the writing in that sense.
Yeah, and while I have you, I mean, I also want to talk about this kind of also goes into the process part of this discussion. Is, you said it was created by someone else, and then you were on the writing team. So for people who are watching who are also want to create a series, can you just sort of break down from your experience, what is a creator, what is a writer, what is a writer's room, what is a director? Because sometimes a series can have a creator, writer, and director who are different people, right?
Yeah. So in 4 More Shots, Please, the creator Rongita Nandi came up with the idea, the seed, the germ of the idea, and she's the one who went and pitched it. Rongita comes up with wonderful ideas, but she never knows how to take the idea and really flesh it out into a film or a series. She requires a writer to do that. And in terms of that, normally a writer's room really has 2, 3, 4 writers, but in this case, the writer's room was just me in my house. There was no physical writer's room writing 10 episodes. With the creator weighing in on how she wanted her vision to really, be in the writing. And the showrunner in that aspect, which is her sister, really takes the vision of the creator and streamlines it through the entire process. So the director changes from season to season in our case. Some series have 2 directors per season. So it's really the creator and the showrunner who kind of keep that one creative vision going along. And it's not necessarily that the directors get repeated. I mean, there's another show that I've co-created where I'm the co-creator and the co-writer, and my co-creator, co-writer is going to be the director. So it's just 2 of us basically doing a lot of jobs. And I find that it's much easier in 4 More Shots because it brings in a lot of perspectives. It's the creator's perspective, it's my perspective, and the director comes in and weighs in at the 8th or 10th episode, So it brings in a lot of perspectives, whereas in the other show, I find that maybe when it comes out, it'll be just one-dimensional and we've done a lot of things that we shouldn't have. So yeah.
I mean, so then in that case, how much say does a director have in a series that's been created by someone else and is written by someone else? And
by the way, that's a magic question for all series.
Yes. It is.
Oh, is that for me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So well, in season 1, while it was being developed, so Anu Menon, the director of season 1, came in halfway through the writing process. So she had a lot more to say in how the show evolved, especially in terms of the production design or the costume design or the music or the casting. But since then, season 2, season 3, unfortunately, the directors have to inherit a lot. Yeah. And they don't really get to add that much, except in terms of, new casting or directing the scenes.
Right. Great, thanks. And then I think Richie, you wanted to add something about one more thing about tone.
Oh yeah, I just thought it was very interesting about both Aseem and Devika talked about humor. That was one thing about tone in my show, which I spent a lot of time on, because if you're doing a show about something like the subject of Delhi crime, and you screw up, I mean, first of all, you can make the choice not to have humor, which I didn't think was right, because then it's so somber for so long. And then if you do have humor, it has to be right on the right, in the right zone. And what I found when I met the cops was they would joke all the time, even though they were investigating the worst things we have ever heard. And especially the women who deal with gang rape every day, basically. But that whole the professional humor of cops who are working 24 hours, anyone. I mean, we've all been in that situation. We work 24 hours a day, and you're not taking away from the effort you're putting in while you make a joke or an offhand remark about something and you laugh about it. And so I found it was part of the tonal balance of Delhi crime was making sure in any given moment that it made sense. Some of the cops were joking either with each other, but it kind of very underhanded. Sometimes it's very quiet. They'll say things. If you catch it, you catch it. If you don't, you don't. There's never anyone doing a belly laugh boisterously, because that's not what the show should be. But it needs to be enough of it there to remind us that we're watching humanity, which has humor no matter what.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, because I think, I mean, human emotions are varied and complex, and they intersect constantly. So even the most serious of things, we still need humor to deal with it in some way. So that's a great
organic, just like Devika was saying. I think that's a really important point, because it needs to be very organic to the situation that you're finding yourself in.
Yeah, and you can tell sometimes when it's forced, when it's not supposed to be there. You can tell, but yeah, this felt very organic in Delhi crime too. So Smriti, I want to move to you. So we can talk a little bit about tone, but for you, I'm also really curious, and this is actually a question we had from Aarti, and I think this applies to Indian matchmaking perhaps the best in this situation. So she was saying, I'm intrigued by the show's abilities to appeal to both local audiences and the diaspora and beyond the diaspora. How do you shape your storytelling to ensure that the content isn't diluted, but still resonates with the different audiences? So that also ties with tone, but I think specifically with Indian matchmaking.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that is a very complicated balance, especially for us. I think with platforms, it's become complicated, especially because now we are essentially all creating content for global platforms. So no matter who you make your series for, it's going to be seen around the world. And so for us, when we were making, sort of in the early stages of developing Indian matchmaking, it was, like, well, who are we? Is this for an Indian audience? Is it for a global audience? Is it for a non-Indian audience? Like, where does this show fall? And I think, we decided early on, and Netflix was very supportive, of this decision, that the most important audience was an Indian audience, whether that's in India or the diaspora. And then whoever else takes to it or gravitates towards it, great. But even going into it with that intention, and certain decisions were made, with that intention, including not over contextualizing aspects, of the culture, like the casteism, colorism, et cetera, because it was like, we all know that those things exist. We don't need a, 2-minute explainer about, what a caste system is. But I think that's also part of the reason that, because the show became it, there was some backlash to that, saying those things should have been contextualized. I mean, I think it's impossible to really strike that perfect balance. Even within India, it's 1.3 billion people. You cannot represent everybody. We need far more shows, more series, more content to represent different aspects, and different ideologies within India and the diaspora and South Asia, not just India. So, and I also just, I think going a step beyond that and thinking a little bit more meta, I was raised in a time where the ultimate goal was for this crossover, something to cross over, And it was a goal that, you know, I saw my father, who was a filmmaker, chase, you know, throughout his career. I chased, you know, for the early part of my career. And only now, you know, am I starting to question why. You know, we have in South Asia, you know, among South Asians, we have an audience of 1.5 billion people, you know. Why are we chasing crossover? You know, like essentially a Western audience is a minority audience for us, you know. And it's something that I'm actively trying to, you know, unravel in my mind, you know, this idea of something needing to be crossover, because I think we have, you know, an enormous audience at home, you know, so to speak. When I say home, I mean, you know, the South Asian countries,
The homelands.
The homelands and the diaspora, right? So, you know, for me, I think I'm, you know, much more focused and interested in speaking to that audience. And then if things, you know, for that content, I mean, I do make a lot of content that has nothing to do with, you know, India or South Asia. But for those projects, you know, I think for me, I try to prioritize the homeland, you know, to use a shorthand term, more than the sort of crossover appeal.
So that just makes me a little curious, because you said then you decided to focus on Indian matchmaking on the Indian audience, like you were catering to them. What was the reason behind having characters in the US? And what was the reason behind having Seema come to the US?
So first and foremost, I mean, that's the reality of her business. She has clients all over the world. And also it's because I wanted to, you know, to show the diversity of the experience, you know, of being an Indian millennial, the way that it's sort of manifesting in India, you know, of course, you know, educated upper class, upper middle class, et cetera, but the way that it's manifesting in India and the way that it's manifested in the diaspora around this idea of marriage, because I think it's very revealing. You know, I think it's like, you know, in the diaspora, sometimes you see, particularly people of my generation, it might be changing now with like people younger than me, but you see this sort of arcing to, you know, like this phase of being rebellious. I'm not dating somebody Indian, I'm not interested in that, whatever. And then you see people arcing towards something more traditional. And then in India, what I've noticed amongst people of a similar sort of educational and you know, urban millennials, et cetera, arcing towards something that's away from tradition, you know, more and more. So I think that's all part of our story, right? As Indians, it's not just, I know it's very different, but the fact that Seema has clients all over the world and has to address their very different needs, you know, depending on where they are, not just where they are, but the families they come from, the priorities, et cetera, I thought was an interesting opportunity to be able to show what's common, what's different, and what's changing.
And Seema from Mumbai connects everyone.
Everybody, yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
That became our tagline, right? Hi, I'm Seema from Mumbai.
Yeah.
I want to move on to sort of what I mentioned earlier. You know, I found sort of these common threads between all of your shows. And I think one, perhaps the most obvious common thread is all your shows are centered around the stories of women. Whether it's how, like women's roles in society, whether it's how society treats women, whether it's, you know, women sort of, you know, claiming agency and sort of trying to live life by their own rules. So, you know, even though all of your shows are completely different from each other, there's a very interesting through line there. And I was also then thinking of the OTT world as a whole, with a lot of streaming series, not just South Asian, but others as well, where a lot of the most successful OTT streaming shows have also been focused on women, or you know, centered around sort of female-centric stories. And I'm wondering, like, first of all, yes, it's the freedom that the OTT platforms give to be able to finally tell a lot of these stories. When you were making your shows, or when you're writing your shows, was that sort of a part of a conscious decision of, you know, finally there is a platform where I can tell these kinds of stories? Where did that come from? Like, was that a conscious decision? I mean, Devika, I want to start with you, because you're like you said, you wanted to create these characters who are aspirational as well. But they're also, you know, you have the show has sort of a glossiness to it on the surface, but then again, it's dealing with all these issues. So was that a conscious decision that we wanted to make a show focused on women, and this platform will allow us to do that?
Yeah, I mean, what excited me to join it was basically the tagline. I would, when Rangita and Nishita Nandi called me to join the show, it was, we want to make a show about 4 women, and it can be whatever you want it to be. And you no longer have to cater to middle India. You no longer have to listen to your producers and your directors telling you that no, the Indian audience will not accept it. And I think the most important part about OTT platforms, at least in India, is that the development teams and the development heads are women. So they are looking for women-centric stories, because even they have been wanting to tell women-centric stories for a long time, because a lot of them are coming from film backgrounds or television backgrounds. And also the other aspect of it is that the OTT platforms treat Indian audiences a lot more maturely than film producers and studios have tended to. We don't spoon feed them, and also we understand that they are mature enough to be able to handle themes and issues that studios and producers in the past have not thought them capable or mature enough to be able to deal with. So yes, there is a conscious effort and a decision to make women-centric stories.
Yeah, and that takes me to Aseem, actually. So similar thing in Pakistan, Pakistani society, obviously there's a lot of similar issues that women have to deal with. So what was your, thought behind that?
I've always gravitated, whether it was my short films or Cake, I gravitate towards women's stories because I just find them more interesting and more complicated and more fun to write. I think what was exciting with Churails was the themes that I could give these women. We could talk about themes that hadn't been spoken about in Pakistan, whether it's child marriage, whether it is closeted homosexuality, whether it's showing a lesbian couple. It was things that were not shown before. And the most exciting thing, and I think it's probably again like a crossover with 4 More Shots, Please, is that I was allowed to do flawed women. I was allowed to do women who were constantly making mistakes, and sometimes terrible mistakes, but they were still empathetic human beings that you could relate to and connect with, and that the audience was rooting for. So that is something that, cinema has for a very long time denied us. It has boxed us between that, the Sati Savitri and the vamp who will come and sing the item song for one. It's just that dichotomy, that those binaries, I think, go with digital. I think that is very exciting about taking something on. I think the most terrifying thing for me personally was being a man and doing it. And that was something that I've spoken about in all my promotional stuff, because I was like, okay, what do I do about the gays? I mean, is it inbuilt in me? Have I seen so much Bollywood that I will now just make a film like a man and show it like a man and not be able to do justice to it? And as I said, I didn't have a writer's room, so I was writing all 10 episodes. So I think what I really asked for, and again, Shailja, my head was also a female, and she understood where I was coming from, and I was given like a group of script consultants. So while they were not doing the writing, and they were all female, so while they were not writing, they were reading everything and giving me notes and trying to fix anything that I was not doing right. So I think that kind of really helped in giving it a voice that I hope is authentic enough.
Right. And that's really interesting point that both of you, especially Devika, you brought up that a lot of the OTT heads are women. Because, we also, when we talk about representation, one of the biggest sort of conversations is once the decision makers change, the stories change. Whether it's women in decision-making roles, or whether it's people of color in decision-making roles or other backgrounds, that's when the stories start to change, because they can influence those changes. So that's really important, I think, coming out of this. It's exciting also, because that's how we're getting all these wonderful shows. And Aseem, I want to go to you. I think in an interview you did, perhaps I think for the BBC, you talked about the moral ambiguity of your characters. And you touched about that just now as well. And I want to kind of take that to everyone as well, where you all have these characters, especially the female characters, who are flawed, who are just, they're ordinary women. They're regular people who, do all kinds of things. So in writing sort of these moral ambiguities, again, is a departure from, say, the conventional storytelling methods, where, especially in South Asia, we're used to the sort of more commercial side of where things get put into boxes, right? Was this, again, sort of a level of freedom that you were trying to incorporate into your stories and your characters with the moral ambiguity, say like, now in this medium of a series, I can explore the gray, you know, with all these characters that I've written. So Aseem, I'll start with you, then I'll go to Richie, because I know Delhi Crime also has really interesting characters.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. I think, I've only done Cake and then I've done Churails. So I have never been in a position where I've had to write for a type. Even with Cake, it was a slightly different thing. It was subtle and it was done for film, and I had censor board in my mind, but they were still flawed characters, you know. And I knew I could push only a little bit, not push so much. But with Churails, I could really make these characters gray, and really, it's not that you sit down to make them gray. I mean, Devika and Richie can speak to their experience, but it's not that I'm sitting down and saying, I want to make these people flawed. I want to give them evil traits or something. I just want to make them real. And we are, as human beings, we are making those mistakes all the time. We are not perfect. And I think just making it real, and the more real you make it, the more flaws come in, the more mistakes they make. So I think it just felt very organic. It felt like, you were trying to be, the only goal was to be authentic. Whether it was, for me, I have two very privileged women out of the four, and two from very underprivileged, because we were trying to show that oppression, while it changes form, it goes through the spectrum of class and divisions. So I think those characters were defined in that way, but the flaws were inherent in all of them. So I think that is just keeping it authentic to what income bracket, what societal strata they were coming from, what kind of backstory we were giving them. They were just authentic to that character, and I think that's what made them real.
That's really well put. Thank you. Richie, do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, it's the relationship that the show and that I have with the women in the show is also very complicated, because on the one hand, my initial reaction to the crime as a man, I mean, look, we all have a reaction to the crime. Every human being does, if you have a heart. As a guy, as a man, I had two reactions that stayed with me over time, outside of the heinousness of it and the monstrosity of it. One was, if I was walking by and I saw something like this happening, what would I do? Would I intervene and maybe lose my life, or would I just pretend like I didn't see it and keep going? In which case, I probably couldn't live with myself. So to me, it became this Medusa in my head of, if I ever encountered something like this anywhere, it would lead to the end, in a way. I just hope I didn't. Second one was, and this was the one that stayed with me every day, and I'm sure it stayed with all of us, especially with guys, is we belong to the gender that did the crime. And so the question is that, were these just psychopaths, random psychopaths? Is it something that happens every week, every day, because there's so many psychopaths running around? Or is it something that's within all of us? That was my male relationship to this, not my normal human relationship, just the male side of it. And then when I met this cop, Chaya, who really is the real principal collaborator of this from the first point, because she's the reason the show exists, the real person. I started to sympathize with her and her plight and her viewpoint, and she to me was a superwoman in every regard. So sure, she's a normal person, but she was a mother and she was this crime fighter, which I'd never seen before in this manner. As I started to construct it, I realized that I'm writing a show about conservatives, and I'm not a conservative. I was in those protests. So I'm writing a show about the other side, which to me was really fascinating as an exploration. So on the one hand, I'm writing women, on the other hand, I'm writing almost a different political, because these are people who believe in king and country and the death penalty, and I don't know where I stand on these issues yet. And maybe I never will. But that's why I wanted the last image of the show to be of these people hanging off a tree, because that's something I saw and experienced, and I didn't know what to feel. So fast forward, the first person who believed in this show, it wasn't just that there was a platform and there were women commissioning. In fact, this was bought by women at Netflix. This was also financed. The first person who believed in the script, because everyone said no at some point, to no way are we doing a gang rape show. The first person who believed in it was a woman in LA, Florence, one of the producers. And she kind of put her stamp on this and said, this is amazing, let's go for it. And then it opened the floodgates to all the support that came in after. and other producers like Pooja and Apurva, who are Indian women, born and raised in India, who believed in this. And I really looked to them to say, look, I am a guy writing these female characters. I'm trying to represent them on what is such a sensitive gender issue, the most heinous and horrific gender issue I've ever seen, we've all ever encountered. Is this right? And they kind of gave me that nod of just keep going. And so from when they gave me that nod, and we didn't have any platforms again, so I had that from the top down. And then I got Shefali Shah, the lead. And so between Chaya and Shefali and myself, and these women producers, we were able to construct it. And in a way, I surrounded myself with women who were extraordinary at what they did, to make sure that I was giving the female characters the room they needed to breathe, and I wasn't imposing my views as a man on them. And where I could was the male characters. Each one of them had, I mean, every character you write has a part of you, of course. The male characters especially had, they asked questions that I was asking. And the sociological questions I answer through the male characters as much as I can in the show.
Right. And that takes me to another, actually it's related to another audience question we're getting. And I'm going to stay with you, Richie, on this. So I want to talk about the reception of your shows. The fun part, once you put something out, then it's open to anyone to critique, interpret, respond however they want.
Sorry, did you say fun part?
The fun part. Isn't it the fun part?
Yeah, theoretically.
Theoretically. So for you, because you made this show, which was based on a story that was in the news constantly, people everywhere were, thought they knew all the facts because of where they were getting them from, whether it's news or WhatsApp forwards or whatever it was. Everyone thought they knew everything about this case based on the information they were fed. So once you put this show out, and I want to hear more about the responses you got, because you've obviously given it a certain point of view. Did you get sort of that backlash of people saying, well, no, this is not how it happened, or you've twisted this or that, or like, was there anything that came your way about that?
No. There was literally out of hundreds of thousands, maybe one or two who disputed it, but I mean, I was, and I'm not exaggerating that number. It was, I mean, one of the things Netflix was so great about this once they came on board was to release it in a manner that was as sensitive as the material was trying to be. So we didn't have any parties and none of that stuff, or billboards and things like that. And one of the first things we did was screen it for crime reporters in Delhi. And these are the people who arguably would know more about the crime than I did. And when we screened it for them, and they would say, you've got everything right, every detail right. And then we would screen it for other journalists in that region. Even police officers watched it and you said, you got it all right. And I was, honestly, the biggest criticism I received, which was minor, was, were you trying to promote the Delhi police? Were you trying to show a pro-police story? And for that, my answer is, I can't speak to the police at large. I can't speak about the Delhi police at large. I can just speak about these 15 officers I got to know and what they did for 1 week. And I think what they did was extraordinary. And even within that, there's a lot of gray area and complexity, as you said, which I tried to present. That's all I can say about all of that. And I stand by that completely, because also there's very few stories that come out of South Asia that are pro-police, that are either not Superman stories of a cop kicking ass, or stories about corruption. And so to me, it was like, well, I'm going to try and do something real to empathize, because if we don't empathize with them, we're not going to fix the problem. Yeah. And if we don't give the women officers what they need to solve these issues, first, none of it will ever get solved. So my reason for doing that show was to invoke empathy, especially for the women officers, lady officers.
And that's pretty amazing that the crime journalists were sort of so impressed by how the way the story unfolded in the show.
Well, they don't have 4 years to research and
yeah,
write.
I was
right?
going
They
to say
have
that says a
few
lot about
weeks.
your research process, which is also very key in developing a series. So moving on to Smriti, kind of tied to that, I think of the 4 shows here, yours was the most recently released, I believe. Yeah, I think it was. So Indian matchmaking kicked up a whole social media storm in all kinds of ways, and there was a lot of. You mentioned this earlier too. There was criticisms around what you weren't mentioning, what you weren't talking about caste or colorism, or a lot of those things. And then also there was a lot of people talking about how like this was so great to have a show like this showing contemporary Indian society dealing with arranged marriage, which again has a lot of misconceptions around it at the same time. And this again, I'm going to tie it into a couple of other audience questions that are coming in. And this, I guess, also could be some of the feedback is, for example, one question is like, if all the characters were real, then how come none of them got married in reality? Okay. And then, yeah, I just wanted to talk about, how you dealt with sort of the feedback coming in from this show, because you said you were trying to represent one particular sort of point of view.
Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that nobody got married should be a testament to the reality of it. Believe me, we would have loved, and Netflix would have loved if we had some weddings at the end of the series. And I mean, that's just the reality, right? Especially for a lot of people of our generation who are Indian, whether they're in India or outside of India, it's not like a matchmaker isn't like a magic wand, that's like gonna suddenly, within 60 days or 90 days or whatever, you're going to find your life partner and get married. Life doesn't work that way for most people, so I think that aspect of it was very real. Sometimes, at least for me, the process of working with a matchmaker and going through that whole, I use the term arranged marriage because that's what the term is in the ether, but we all know it's like not that simple. It's like arranged marriage can mean any which thing, so, but just for for shorthand, that whole arranged marriage process, I think revealed more to me about myself and my relationship with the people who are close to me, and how I sort of wanted to what I wanted out of partnership and companionship, more than it was about just a linear process of finding a husband. And then in terms of the feedback, both positive and critical, I mean, honestly, I mean this like completely sincerely. I think it is such an amazing thing that we have gotten to a point with content, that purports to represent the South Asian experience, that we can hold it to a high standard, and I absolutely welcome, again, like I grew up at a time where we had Apu, and it was like, no one even thought to criticize, because it was like, oh, there's somebody, like Brown on it's like an animated character too, but like no one even thought to criticize it. You were just excited to see some glimpse, of yourself and your background, represented in mass media and pop culture. And again, I'm talking from like a, Western perspective. In India, obviously it's very different, but I think it's great that we can hold our content to a higher standard, but I also think we need to recognize that we're at an infancy when it comes to representing, for a global audience, what it means to be South Asian. And it is, 1.3, 1.4, whatever it is, billion people, dozens of languages, religions, ideologies, backgrounds. There's no way for one show to represent all of that. And I think that there's sort of a natural, believe me, if I didn't make the show, I would probably have some of the same reactions. I think when something blows up and kind of gets into the zeitgeist, then it's like the natural instinct is to be like, well, they didn't do this and they didn't represent this point of view, and what about this? But I think for me, it was more important to be honest to the world. I mean, it was the simplest thing, frankly, and and important to be honest to the world and to the participants in the show and follow their journey. That was always the North Star for us, is who are these people and what is their journey, and then we can sort of start teasing out what that all means. From that, I really don't think that the show, I think it would have, immediately felt false if I had stunt casted, for diversity, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because we all know that a matchmaker like Smriti Mundhra is not necessarily working with the LGBTQ community in India. And what would have been the point of trying to make this world feel more inclusive and more progressive than it actually is? I think we get further if we actually take a hard look at the reality of our lives and the things we value and the systems that we uphold. And then we can debate, what aspects of it we should preserve and what aspects of it we need to evolve out of. And that is exactly what happened after the release of Indian Matchmaking. And it's like an absolutely wonderful thing. I think that the fact that people are talking about this between generations, talking about this on the evening news, on Twitter, etc., I think is a great thing. And I think it's also revealing within, India and the Indian diaspora, kind of, casting a light on some of the things that we just sort of never talk about or sweep under the rug or are afraid to talk about, but also globally, demonstrating that no culture is one thing, and no country is one thing. And I think it's important, just like we talk about how, we want to write characters that are flawed and that are real and human. I sort of think that way about our culture. I'm just sort of generalizing here when I say culture, but, about who we are as Indians and South Asians. We're not only, yoga and haldi and, Bollywood and weddings and all of that. We have, some deeply problematic ideals, that we carry forward generation to generation. And that is natural and normal. And it's something that we ought to be talking about and grappling with. So that way we can start to evolve out of it.
Right. Yeah, and it brings up, so we had a panel, part of CoSAFF, which was with South Asian actors a couple of days ago. And, they were discussing this idea of the burden of representation. And, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think your show came out right after Mindy's show, right?
Yeah, a little bit after, yeah.
A little bit after. And so it was almost like 2 back-to-back South Asian shows coming out on Netflix the same year. And again, Mindy's show got the same, criticisms of like, oh, it's only showing one particular, upper caste Brahmin South Indian sort of point of view. And
I will say, because I really want to make sure this comes across and is clear, I do agree 100% that it is annoying and problematic that the dominant perspective, the sort of perspective of what India is upper caste Hindu, mostly North Indian, perspective. And I mean, honestly, that goes for food, that goes for entertainment, et cetera. And I think that absolutely needs to change and evolve. But, we have to first, get people to recognize that there is more diversity, of ideology and culture, within the diaspora. And then we can get to, well, what is that diversity and what are those other points of view?
Right. And basically what we need is more shows, more content, right? And then, I want to move to Aseem now. Speaking of reception of your shows, and this, again, we had an audience question about this too. So we recently found out that your show has been banned in Pakistan.
Yesterday.
So I want to talk about 2 things. One is, your show has been out for a few months, right?
Yeah.
So when it first came out, what was the reception like? Because, and to go back to what Smriti was also mentioning, and Richie to an extent, often the shows that get the most sort of feedback or debate are shows that, unveil what's happening, like the realities of what's happening. And usually it's what makes people uncomfortable that they kind of react against, right? So for your show, I want to ask, what was the reaction like when it first came out in Pakistan and elsewhere? And then now, a few months later, it's just been banned by the Pakistani government. So what does that mean?
Yeah, I think I'll probably be repeating myself. I think or repeating what other rest of the panelists have said, that I think that there are 2 things. Firstly, the burden of representation was so huge because we are the first and the only show to come out of Pakistan. So then it kind of became that it was either catered to the privileged women, or it wasn't catering enough to the class divide, whether it was, I mean, as diverse as, some people would call it homophobic because a gay character dies in it, and some people would call it I was too much of a sympathizer in a country where, homosexuality is criminalized. So you can't make everyone happy. And I think that's the one thing that I've learned. You can try, and you should welcome all criticism because it's a healthy debate. And what was great was that the both sides, the detractors and the people who loved it, was so strong that you just have to take a backseat and not do anything and just let them debate it, let them have those conversations and talk it out and figure out what they want to figure out as to what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. So I think that that realization did not come on the first day. So I was panicky. I was like, oh, why is this person not understanding this? And why is that person not understanding this? And after that, like Shailja was my head. She was like, just let it go. Let it go. You've given it to the world, and now let the world do what the world has to do. And so within Pakistan, there was always noise. You have, India has still seen, it's already seen strong women characters. It's seen, to a certain degree, it's seen women swearing and smoking and drinking. And so I bring that to Pakistan, and it's not the same. It's like women are smoking, women are drinking, women are swearing, women are talking about sex, women are talking about whatever they want to do. And they are getting men, they are trying to smash patriarchy. How is that even possible? So I think, just thematically and in terms of what the protagonist represented, it became too much for a lot of people. However, it was playing on an international platform, and you don't easily get to curtail digital. It is, it's not something that people have control over. So this ban has been surprising. It's and confusing. Having said that, it's only in Pakistan, and this is released globally, so we have the global audience still, and Pakistanis will now, who even the ones who did not want to watch it, will now find a reason and a way to watch it. So in a way, it's perhaps a blessing in disguise. I don't know. I mean, it's disheartening. It's disheartening because your country of origin, and you make something for it, and it's being appreciated, especially internationally, India, else UK and US, but it is what it is. And I think both parts, as I said, are strong. There are a lot of people supporting it. There's been a lot of love for it. There's been a lot of love for the actors who did the main role. So I think it's overall, it's been a win-win for us.
Yeah, and I mean, usually with bans, what ends up happening is more people want to watch.
Excitement and curiosity. I think it peaks, and they're like, why was it banned? In fact, it had released in August, like 10th of August or something. It had a really good first month, then it starts dwindling like it does the second month. And I was literally like, I had moved on. I was trying to write something else. And for the last 2 days, it's been back on. And I'm like trying to dodge like press and this and that, because it's just everyone wants to talk about it again. So
Right. And then, I know we're coming close to time, so I want to go to Devika. So another question I had was around mistakes and learnings from this process. Again, this applies to a lot of people who want to maybe make a series, or people who are just curious. Once, you've done 2 seasons of the 4 More Shots, are there any things that you would have done differently looking back? Are there any mistakes you've learned from in the process that people could sort of take away from this?
Well, the first one is that it had a lot to do with, I suppose, if I was the creator, I would not put them in such a privileged background, because for me, it's a takeaway from my writing. I always have this bone to pick with my creator, that I would rather people concentrate on my writing than look at the clothes and the art direction. So that's one. I think that even when you're talking about privileged women, they should not be in a world that is so alien to the rest of the women watching it. You hope that they will be able to vibe with the emotions and be able to feel the same problems, etc. But you don't want to put them in a class where they say, oh, but these are rich people, these are privileged women, why should we care about their problems? That's one. And the second, I think, is not to try and tell too much in one go. OTT platforms have come in, we're going to have a lot of opportunities, so it's not necessary to cram in everything that you wanted to say in one season. So that's a big learning.
Yeah. Is there a season 3 coming?
Yes, there is. The shoot is postponed for the time being because of COVID, but hopefully we can start shooting soon.
Awesome. And then, I mean, I'll go through everyone here, but while we're speaking with you, what is next for you?
I've co-created a show with my first director, Navdeep Singh. He also directed NH10. So that we are in the process of developing and writing at the moment.
Awesome. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Richie, so any learnings, mistakes, and then also what's next for you?
Definitely there's learnings. I mean, look, going from writing and directing 90-minute projects to writing and directing a 7-hour project, you learn a lot. And there's certain things I would do again for sure. Other things I would never do. There's so many of them. I would say the big one I want to stick to is to have unlimited development time. I think and I had that on Delhi Crime, but I would want to continue with that because I think if you're going to go through the trouble of making something and put your heart and soul into it for so many years, you want to make sure that the foundation for it is right.
But is that a luxury though, like having unlimited development time?
Depends how you look at it. If you have low overhead costs and you only have a bicycle and live in a tiny room, then you can probably figure out a way to afford time to sit at a computer, and especially during this time,
right,
and just keep working away.
Right.
Problem is once you start to engage with the industry at large, there's a time limit, as we've implied previously in this panel. And when that time limit comes, there's a gun to your head. And for production is necessary because there's money involved. But before that, I feel like if you're going to conceive of a project, you need to really make sure it's, in my view, worth doing. I don't want to add to the noise out there. I want to try and do something that makes an impact. At the very least, that it's the best version of what I'm trying to do.
And what's I know season 2 just wrapped, but is that next for you? What's next after that?
No, I mean I'm an EP on season 2 of Delhi Crime, but I didn't write and direct it. Okay. And the team is very able, and they've gone on to do it. I had previous engagements I needed to get to. There was a film I was about to shoot in March, which obviously is on hold. So I'll get to that as soon as it's safe to do so. And that's something I wrote a few years back. And then several series. During lockdown, I've been just writing a bunch of series, which should lay the groundwork for me to do things for the next several years.
Great, looking forward to that.
And one that's in Malayalam. So talking about representation, I think it's really, if I'm going to continue to do South Asian stories, I'm trying to work in the Northeast. I'm trying to work in different parts that I've never experienced. Because certainly growing up in a Panju family in Toronto, I didn't even know there were other parts of India. Because that's not what I would hear. We only hear Punjab, Punjab, Punjab. And for me, now experiencing India, spending years in India, it's like, wait a sec, this is a fraction of it, has the highest bandwidth that exports media-wise. And for me, I'm just interested in exploring other aspects of it.
Great. Well, we look forward to that. Smriti, what's next for you? And any words of wisdom as we end this?
Wisdom. I think in terms of what I learned, over the course of making Indian matchmaking, and also just the evolution of my career in the last year or two, I think it's really just, and it's a continued learning. It's not, by any means something that I've gotten good at or perfected, but I think it's, trying to recognize one's leverage and hold on to one's voice, because I think it can, when you're early, in wading into the industry side of the industry, when you're working with, platforms and experienced producers, and there's money involved and everything, I think it can be intimidating, and you could sometimes feel like you're so, I think a lot of people might recognize just this like gratitude mindset, where you're just grateful to be there and have the opportunity, that you feel like you can't push any further. I think that's a fallacy, and it's something that I am actively working on, sort of, unraveling from my own mind, is getting out of that gratitude mindset and recognizing that, the gratitude goes both ways, that I contribute a lot, to the platforms with my ideas, and I have a right to sort of speak up for, the aspects, that are important to me. And in terms of what's next, I have a docuseries that I'm putting the finishing touches on. That's, I guess, loosely speaking, about Bollywood, which will be out at the top of next year. And then I'm shooting a film for HBO, which is about a mother and her son, her young son, who are homeless and trying to work their way through our absolute joke of a public housing system in California.
Wow.
And
Great.
there's humor in that one, right, Smriti?
Come again?
There must be humor in that one.
Lots of it.
Yeah.
And then Aseem, you get the final words. Any words of wisdom, and then what's next for you?
I think just again, Smriti said this, but like just being brave in your what you're trying to say. I think we've, or at least I have, when I was working for cinema, when I was doing films, there are so many restrictions and parameters that you're always thinking about, and I think for me, especially, digital has been that space which is providing me a platform to just, who are saying that your voice matters and you tell it the way you want to tell it. And I think just figuring that out, oh, really, I have control over this. I think just accepting that and trying to use that control and be as brave as you can in the storytelling. And I think on the shoot, I guess, enjoying myself, which I never do. I'm always just so scared of failing when I'm actually shooting stuff that I'm just petrified and I don't enjoy it. In hindsight, I'm like, oh man, that was such a great 3 months and I was just miserable the whole time. So I think be less miserable. I think that's important.
Be less miserable.
That'll be new bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Be less miserable.
But I am developing 2 series, but early days, still writing. One for Z5 and one for UK. So let's see.
Could there be a Churails season 2?
Yes, but I can't do it immediately.
Makes
Not
sense.
if they want me to write the whole thing. It takes a lot out of you to write so much.
Yeah.
And but I think there will be at some point. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time to share all your experiences. I'm sure our audience learned a lot from everything that you've talked about, and just all the very different perspectives. And you're all, all of your shows have been sort of path breaking or sort of push boundaries in so many different ways. And that's ultimately, I think, as South Asian communities, what we're looking for is just new storytelling, more interesting stories, new perspectives, things we haven't seen before. So thank you once more for joining us, and thank you for watching. Have a great day.
Thank you.